Howdy, howdy, everybody. This is Colin, back at it again with another movie review. Today I'm going to be talking about Butterfly Kisses from 2018. This is a found footage horror movie directed by Eric Christopher Myers, who also plays a fairly prominent role in the movie as well. So, found footage horror is a genre that is kind of overdone and has a lot of movies contained within it. Definitely a genre that I would say is a bit oversaturated. So, it was nice to see a movie that is a kind of a refreshing take on the genre and has some interesting elements that I think make it stand out from its peers within the genre. So, one main thing that I want to get out of the way right now is this will contain some spoilers. So if you do want to watch this movie, I would encourage you to click away now and come back after you see it. But yeah, let's dive right in. So first and foremost, Eduardo Sanchez, who is the director of the Blair Witch Project, which is like the original found footage horror movie, actually has a role within this movie, which is pretty cool. He actually plays himself. And that kind of leads me into the main kind of cool factor or main selling point, I guess, of this movie is that it's very like self-aware. It kind of makes fun of found footage movies and kind of pokes fun at itself, and is just like I kind of said, is much more self-aware than other movies within the genre, and I think that's kind of what sets it apart from its peers. It's handled well. It's got a variety of plot points that kind of weave in and out and together that make it interesting. So the main kind of summary of the movie is it's about this guy who is a movie kind of filmmaker, and he finds, or rather, I believe it's his mother in law, finds some tapes in their basement in this house that they move into. And it's like a rough cut of a documentary that was filmed about 10 years prior by some film students documenting they call him like the blinking man or the peeping tom. It's like a local legend within their town, and it's kind of got like a ritual that you summon him with. And so I suppose it is a bit of a cliche sort of plot, kind of the Bloody Mary sort of legend. But the way it's done in this movie is actually pretty cool. So they kind of use the camera to trap the spirit or the entity in it. So the idea is that you summon it by staring at this train tunnel, and it's like a real train tunnel. So this movie does kind of blur the lines between reality and fiction a little bit. So it is taking place in real locations, and even though the legend itself is not real, it was actually so convincing to someone who was writing like a folklore book in the area that she actually included it within the book, and the director had to like reach out and be like, well, I actually made this up. So it does kind of blur the lines, and it does a very good job kind of navigating that line between fake and real, fact and fiction. But they use the camera to complete this ritual where they stare. You're supposed to stare at this train tunnel for an hour between midnight and 1 o'clock, and right on the dot at 1 o'clock, as long as you haven't like blinked, the peeping tom will emerge and start like tracking you down and kind of hunting you, and eventually he kills you. So they end up using the camera to capture this, and the documentary that the film students are making is kind of documenting that whole thing, and it ends up kind of going off the rails and people die, and it ends in a pretty graphic scene with one of the film students like mutilating herself to keep from blinking. But so it's a documentary there, but then the main plot of the story in present times is also a documentary. So this crew is filming this filmmaker who, his mother-in-law found these tapes that these film students made. So he calls in this documentary crew, and they film him trying to convince people that it's real. And, people really aren't believing him, obviously. And so it's kind of one of those things where you kind of hate this guy, this filmmaker, because he's kind of an ass, and like he's so arrogant and kind of up his own ass that he like just refuses to take no for an answer. And he's going and getting the audio examined and the video examined, and people are telling him like, this is probably a hoax, and they're even like accusing him of making the original tapes at one point. And it's one of those things like you kind of hate this guy because he's arrogant, but at the same time, like you almost empathize with him because he's trying to get himself out of a bad financial situation. He's poor, and him and his wife have some conflict, and he ends up like making some really poor financial choices, and his wife leads him, and that just kind of creates this cataclysmic spiral out of control that leads us to the end of the movie. So I really did like that human element that kind of brings you into the story and makes you able to relate with the characters. With that being said, though, I will say this movie, while being very good, I think, is also not particularly like standout. Like, it kind of falls into the same found footage genre that all is, like I was saying, is very saturated, and all these other movies kind of exist. It doesn't really do anything besides the self-awareness that kind of makes it stand apart, in my opinion. That's not to say it's a bad movie. I did really enjoy this movie, but it's also not something that just stands head and shoulders above its peers. It's interesting, it's well made, the acting is solid, the script is good, and it's produced very well. I mean, it literally feels like you're watching a documentary, and you kind of, even watching it, are like, well, this feels real. Like, you, even though it's a movie, you're like, wow, this does feel real at some points. But at the same time, other found footage movies also have achieved that. So, like I said, it's not standout. It does have a couple jump scares as well, and as I do these movie reviews, it will probably become clear. I'm not a big fan of jump scares, not because I don't think they're necessarily effective, but because I do believe in a lot of cases it's kind of like a cop-out. So, rather than like putting time into, creating a lot of tension and getting the viewer on edge, a lot of movies, especially modern horror movies that are high budget and come from these big studios, like The Nun 2, for example, that I reviewed, kind of rely on jump scares as the entire basis of the fear factor. This did not have a lot of jump scares, but the ones that were there they were somewhat effective, but some of them I kind of felt were a bit out of place. You're kind of watching this movie and they're talking about something, and then it's like, pah, like it's like a jump scare kind of out of nowhere. And I do suppose that is what they're for, but I just think maybe relying more on building that tension before dropping that on the viewer is a better way of going about that. That being said, the movie does have some pretty solid tension building throughout. And like I said, you do kind of feel like you're watching a real documentary, and that it's a real event that has happened and is taking place as you watch. But the scares themselves aren't really that great. Besides the end, I will say the final scene of the movie is freaky, especially the build up to it, because you're kind of shown the prior portion of it at the beginning of the movie. It's like an interview that's been spliced. So you have the first half and then the main chunk of the movie, and then you have the second half at the end. And so you've seen the first half, so you're kind of watching it at the end and like, oh, well, here we go again. But then it's like very different, and it just kind of drops this big, gruesome sort of event on you, and it's pretty spooky. That is one part I will say I thought was quite good. And another scary sort of portion as well that I thought was well done was the way the documentary crew that the main filmmaker has hired, to follow him around and is documenting him, the way they kind of get invested into the story, and it all kind of culminates in this filmmaker getting way too involved in this myth and, performing the ritual himself, and that also has some very bad outcomes as well. So I thought that was a pretty cool sort of element to this movie, something that I felt was done particularly better than other found footage horror movies that I've seen. So with that being said, I guess just to summarize, this is definitely worth the watch, and if you're looking for like a TLDR, that is what I would say. This is a solid movie. It's worth the watch. And as far as found footage horror movies go, it's quite well made. So congrats to Eric Christopher Myers, because he really did do a good job with this movie, and it was well executed. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything about this movie. I would probably give it like a 7 out of 10. So it's above average. It's not a standout film like I said, but it is above average and is definitely worth the watch. And for some, it may even be the best found footage horror movie that exists. I would certainly say it's a contender for that title. And maybe just for me, it's the fact that found footage horror movies, I'm just not a huge fan of them in general. So maybe I'm a bit biased against this style of movie, but I can definitely appreciate how well made it was, the fact that the plot was well done, and overall, like, it was a solid movie. So yeah, with that being said, that has been my review of Butterfly Kisses. Be on the lookout for some more movie reviews. I've definitely got some more in store. Taking some comments from my first video. That is also something that I will be taking into consideration. And I also have a series idea kind of planned that I think would be pretty interesting to do as well. So with that being said, I hope you all have enjoyed this video, and I'll see y'all next time. Peace.